We ate lunch at the brewery the other day.
Per hour.
Sorry.
This is the home of Evertson. I forget what his first name was, but he was a sea captain, and he sold a building lot to Asser Levy, one of the first successful merchants, businessmen. He started off his career here as a butcher, and then later became very successful and actually started more as a banker. This is a tavern, very similar. There was something like, out of the 30 buildings, 8 of them were taverns. And I'm really puzzled over that. I thought, God, that's just one street. What if you look at the whole city? There must be a tavern, like every third house must be a tavern.
There are 57 taverns in New York City.
57, okay. My wife, we discussed this, and she has a theory, which I think is probably correct. Notice when I started to work on these buildings, they're tiny. Some of them are one room, some of them are two rooms. They're very small. You cannot socialize in a small space like that. So the tavern becomes the place where you go to meet with your neighbors and spend time and give the kids a chance to fall asleep without their father getting drunk in the living room. The interesting thing about Otto's Tavern over here is that right street from Otto's Tavern is a tavern owned by Charles Bridges. So we have the Dutch Tavern and we have the English Tavern. So how did I get to New York? I learned from Albany. Well, by boat. This is, we're back to the Van Curler drawing. This is another painting that I did of Van Curler's bark. This is now upriver near his farmstead, which is in Waterloo, New York. And here are some Mohawks who are making their way to his bark because he happens to be carrying horses on board. Horses weren't something that the Indians either traded for or were particularly interested in, but they were curious about them. So this painting sort of gives a sense of that event. But it was Van Curler's bark really took me to New York. And you saw a detailed model that I did for the History Center. Well, while I was working on that, I developed this pretty crude oval model of Manhattan at that time. The Hudson River, this is the East River, the little canal there. This is the Manhattan out here. And I did this painting of the bark. Within the last few weeks, I started to read more about the fort. And this painting, that is the fort that Peter Stuyvesant wishes he had. He didn't have that fort. He had a fort that was really falling apart. It was in pretty bad shape. Pigs were knocking the walls of the fort down. So they did try to repair it. One of the bastions was stone. They started with the rampart, never quite finished it. And Stuyvesant warned the company, if we don't do something about this fort, we can't defend this city. And he couldn't get any support. The English come, the fort is surrendered, it's not Dutch anymore. Well, so the English come in. We got it now. It's our city. They didn't repair the fort. The Dutch watched and they noticed, hey, they're not doing anything with the fort. Let's the city back. So when the Dutch decide to take the city over, the English don't fight because they have no fort to fight from, and they surrender to the Dutch. So that's why that little flip occurred. I will probably do this fort again, maybe 20 more times, and it'll get more and more dilapidated every time. This is Manhattan Governor's Island. This is the Hudson River. This is Stuyvesant's house, great house. Now, I'm fairly confident that I got that house pretty much correct. That right there. It was called the Great House. It's depicted like this on the Castello plan. The building that appears to have a bell gable, and it has some unusual pilasters. Also, the south wall, which faces the harbor, has no windows except for a little round window in the gable end. So I looked at that on the Castello plan and I said, that's so specific. I mean, it's so specific. Why would Cortelyou depict it that way? Well, I found a view of Manhattan that was drawn in 1720 by Dan Burgess. And the Burgess view shows the Great House. The Great House is a ruin in 1720. But what survives in Burgess's view is you can see a pattern of the glass in the wall, and you can see a portion of the end wall distinctly depicted with no windows. So I have an indication from two sources many years apart that agree. So that gives me the confidence that I think it's something like that. The rest of the city, it's the texture of this that I think is pretty close. The area right in front of the fort was where the early houses were built. They were very simple, small, very junky. In the later years, some of the bigger houses started go into construction along the Strand. So I have a low-rent district over here and a high-rent district over there. Pretty accurate. This is a painting that I did of Hanover Square. This worklet in the background. Again, based on taking the data from the Costello Plan and development, putting it into an image. And this is the most recent painting I've done. This is called The Bay of Manhattan. And this is the arrival of a ship with 60 colonists aboard. And this little skiff is sort of just crossed paths with the merchant ship and sort of headed for the Hudson River. But in the background, we have the Church of St. Nicholas and Stuyvesant's Great House. And that's it. Yes, scattered all the place. Collegiate Church here in New York owns two of the pieces that you saw. But the rest of them are owned, some are in corporate locations, one or two are in historical societies. There's going to be, of course, this exhibition may be a little bit difficult to get to, but I've been invited to 30 of these paintings next year. So I'm going to have a show at the Museum in Horn. And in 2010, I'm going to have an exhibit at the Fenimore Art Museum in Cooperstown, which will have many of these paintings. So there are some. There will be a few on exhibit next year at the New York State Museum in Albany and the Albany Institute of History and Art. Yes,
Ken? I'll give you a little plug. You have a website with a lot of these pictures on.
Yes.
And although most of us aren't able to afford $9,000 for an original, you do sell, and I've gotten one with Fort Orange, which is where my ancestors came from.
I might add too that the New Amsterdam History Center does have a website, www.
It's on this orange sheet, Courtney.
Okay. And some of the paintings are also on that website.
I've been asked to put something together. I did a book about 15 years ago called Visions of New York State. And that's going to go into a second printing. And I've been asked to do another book. I think it'll take a few years for me to put it together, but it'll be mostly these Dutch paintings and a description similar to what I said today in that book. Yes, Joel.
Yeah.
I want to.
Great stuff. But what I'm into, you're coming up, changing your mind. You sound like an archaeologist. I've always been stumped by the stones of the fort and the illusions of the stone. How much stone was there? Could you go into a little detail how you figured that out? Because I'm confused.
It's the thing that really got me thinking about how bad the building was.
Yeah.
Are the letters that Stuyvesant wrote asking for help, where he talks about the conditions of it. And what was the name of the paper, Courtney, that was in? It was a little publication in the 1890s. The writer was Maud Wilder Goodwin was her name. And it's called Dutch Days or something like that. But in this little magazine, she had excerpts from all these letters. So there's the beginning of a trail there to sort of, the other thing about the fort, it had no ditch. They wanted a ditch, they wanted a moat, but there wasn't one. So, I mean, it was, when I showed the painting of Fort Orange, which I keep changing my mind about, we know Fort Orange had a moat, depicted with moat many times. The fort, I think the fort in all had been built, it wasn't stone, it was wood, but it may have been slightly more sophisticated than the one in New York, even smaller. But again, these things unravel over time.
Yeah.